Never solved a cryptic crossword? Here's how. This is ice. This is the word ice, and this is a standard crossword clue for ice. You can see there's the number on the right-hand side called the enumeration, which tells you how many letters are in the answer, and then there's the definition for the answer you're looking for. Well, this is a cryptic crossword for the word ice. It's exactly the same, except we add a little bit, which allows you to get the answer through wordplay. So in this clue, found in Arctic environment is telling you you can find the word ice inside Arctic environment. So in a cryptic crossword clue, you have three parts. There is the literal, which is the definition part. There is the cryptic, which is that wordplay section. And then there's the surface, which is the sentence that is made out of the two sections combined that never really has anything to do with the clue. Okay, so a cryptic crossword is just an easier version of a standard crossword, right? There's two ways to get to the answer. Well, here's the catch. The literal definition must be at the beginning or the end, but you're not told where it is, and it's your job to figure it out. So that's how you solve a cryptic. I make a new cryptic clue every day, and in this video, I'm bringing every single one of my clues into one puzzle, which I'm going to solve and explain for you now. Now, if you're new to cryptic crosswords, or you haven't caught all of my shorts, this is a great way to get involved. But if you have seen all of my shorts, there's still something here for you. And that's because in every crossword I make, I hide something in the geometry of the puzzle. So in this puzzle, I've hidden two different tree species somewhere in the grid. I'll point it out at the end of the video, so stick around and see if you can find it before I tell you. Hello, and thank you for joining me in solving this month's cryptic crossword. If you're solving along, best of luck to you, and if you just want to watch, then I hope you can sit back with a nice hot drink and enjoy. So when I'm solving a cryptic crossword, the first thing I tend to do is look for a shorter clue, and that's because it tends to be the case that the shorter a clue is, the simpler it is to solve. That's a kind of general truth, right? So let's start with this 4 down clue. Vain IB student partially offering tips. Now, remember in a cryptic crossword clue, there are two parts of every clue, right? There's the surface and there's the literal. And we don't know which side the literal occurs on. So in this clue, it could be that vain is the literal, or it could be that tips is the literal. Offering tips maybe as well, because of course, it can be any chain from the end or any chain from the beginning. So it could be vain IB student, but that's pretty unlikely because there's not really a synonym of vain IB student. Okay, so the first thing I'm looking for to kind of help me figure out where the literal is what are called indicator words. These are words that tell you to do something, and they can be really the crux of parsing what a clue is doing. So in this clue, I'm seeing the word partially. So if I'm seeing partially, there's kind of one of two possible things going on. Either part of the chain offering tips is going to give me a word for vain IB student, or part of vain IB student is giving me a word for offering or tips. But offering can be a link word, right, telling you that vain IB student partially gives you, offers the word tips. So that's my kind of reading of the clue. So we're looking for a word that means tips, and that's offered to us through part of vain IB student partially. And I can actually see here that inside vain IB student, we have the word nibs. So our first word is nibs. Nibs are, of course, the tip of a pen. All right, so moving on then, let's have a look at this 11 down clue. We have ushers in older men after divine queen abruptly, and we can see that it ends in an S, right? Now, this is pretty useful in cryptic crosswords because a literal has to kind of be in the same tense as the word it's cluing, right? So if it ends in an S, it might be a plural or a kind of like verb that is currently happening. And that leads me to think that ushers in is our literal here. So if ushers in is our literal, let's have a look at older men after divine queen abruptly as our cryptic. Well, older men, I know, can be abbreviated to ALDS. And that's because the kind of government abbreviation of older man is ALD, And so the plural of that would be ALDS. Okay, and then we have the word after. So it's telling us that older men is going to go after whatever Divine Queen abruptly provides. So I feel pretty confident in putting ALDS as the last 4 letters of our clue. So now we have Divine Queen abruptly finding us our first 3 letters. And abruptly is a common indicator that tells you to remove the last letter of a word, right? If something's cut abrupt, it doesn't quite finish. So we're looking for a word for a Divine Queen, and we're going to make it abrupt. We're going to remove that last letter. And a Divine Queen in Greek mythology, the queen of the gods, is Hera. So we remove the last letter of Hera, giving us H-E-R, and we have the word heralds. And if I usher something in, I herald it, right? Okay, let's have a look at 3 down then. House features terrible bagels. Well, once again, we don't know whether the literal is house or house features, or whether it's bagels or terrible bagels, right? We just know that it's at the beginning or at the end. So I'm going to look for an indicator that might point me in the right direction. And an indicator I see here is the word terrible. Now, terrible is sometimes used to indicate an anagram. And an anagram indicator can essentially be any word that implies that something's not quite right, that something's moving around, that it's bustling or active. It's a really broad indicator. So we're going to make something terrible, we're going to anagram it. And here's a really good trick with anagrams in cryptic crosswords. You can't anagram indirectly. That means we can't take a word, so if we were looking at bagels, right, we can't switch bagels to a synonym, I don't know, bread, and then anagram those letters, because it's not fair, right? That could lead us to almost anything. So if you see an anagram, it must be a direct anagram. That means we're anagramming the exact letters as they appear in the puzzle. So what that means is that you can count the letters of words next to terrible and see whether any of them would have the same amount of letters as the answer. And bagels does have 6 letters. So my theory would be that we're going to make bagels terrible, and that's going to give us a word that means house features. And sure enough, if we jumble up the letters in bagels, we get gables. And gables are the triangular section of wall just below a roof. So house features, right? Features of a house. All right. So moving on to 13 across then. We have barrels are part of aged rum storage. Okay, once again, I'm seeing part of here, and that's doing the same work as partially in our 4 down clue, right? It's telling us that part of this string is going to give us our answer. So barrels are part of aged rum storage is telling us we can find a word for barrels inside aged rum storage. And here it is, drums. Drums are barrels. So we can pop drums in here. So moving along to 2 down then. Opening essay, missing first page, solution yielded in staple. Okay, so this one is pretty tough, but I can see a couple of indicator sections that might point us towards what is the literal. So the first thing I'm seeing is missing first, and missing is very, very likely telling us to get rid of a letter or a word from something else. So I'm thinking that this section is probably part of the cryptic. And I'm also seeing yielded. And if something yields, it gives up, right? So I'm thinking again that something is being removed from something else. So solution yielded in staple is probably also part of the cryptic, which only really leaves the word opening as our literal. So let's operate on that theory and have a think about what our cryptic section could be doing. Essay missing first page, solution yielded in staple. Well, an essay could be a paper, right? And missing first page might be telling us to remove a P, or the first P that appears in paper. And that's because page in a book is often abbreviated to P. So we take the first P out of paper and we get A-P-E-R. All right, so our next bit is solution yielded in staple. Well, a staple could be a fixture, right? If a meal is a staple at a restaurant, it's a fixture of that restaurant. And a solution can be a fix, right? So fix yielded in fixture is telling us that we got rid of the fix in fixture, giving us T-U-R-E. And that gives us the word aperture. And an aperture in a camera is the opening. So let's have a look at 9 across. Stress politician suffers from is suppressed by drugs. Okay, once again, we're going to start by looking for indicators, words that tell us to do something. So here, the only indicator I can spot is suppressed by. If you're suppressed by something, you're kind of kept down, you're kept under by it. So suppressed by drugs may well be telling us to put drugs around some other chain. So that tells us that very likely our literal is right at the beginning of the clue, right? Because drugs is, we think, part of the wordplay. And so stress is probably going to be our literal. Stress politician doesn't really seem to lead us to a word. So looking for a word that means stress, and we're going to get there through politician suffers from is suppressed by drugs. All right, well, here's an easy part. A politician in the UK is very often abbreviated to MP. And we have a P here, so maybe we're popping NP over here. And that would make sense, right? Because we know that a chain is going to be suppressed by drugs. So politician suffers from is going to kind of be put inside drugs. Okay. So if you suffer from something, you have it, right? So suffers from is has, and then is goes straight in the clue. And all of that is going to be suppressed by drugs. Well, drugs is abbreviated to EE, and that's because a drug might be an ecstasy pill, commonly referred to as E. So drugs to ecstasy pills are EE. So EE is suppressing MP has is, and we get emphasize. And if you stress a point, you emphasize it. Okay, one down. Awkwardly admit Chloe is neat. All right, well, immediately I can see an indicator word here. Awkwardly is telling us to anagram something. You know, if you treat something awkwardly, you treat it strangely, you jumble up the letters. So we're looking for an anagram of admit Chloe, and we can count the letters here. That's 10 letters. So almost certainly what we're anagramming. And that's going to give us that is a word meaning neat. Okay, so if I jumble up the letters of admit Chloe, I can get the word methodical. And if you're neat, you are methodical. 16 across. More than beaten, collection of papers aced without answer secured. All right, tough one here, but secured, once again, is a pretty common indicator word. So secured is telling you, very much like suppressed, that something secures something else. So once again, we want to be looking at the beginning for our literal. So it could just be a word meaning more, but more than likely it's this whole string here, more than beaten. We want a word that means kind of an excessive beating, right? More than beating something. Okay, and we're going to get there through collection of papers aced without answer secured. Okay, well, a collection of papers is a ream. There's not really many things that you could get from collections of papers, so that's a pretty direct one if you know the word. And then aced without answer is securing that. Ream, which, aced without answer, secured. So we can pop ream in here. We can see the E is already there in that position, so it tells us that ream goes there. And then aced without answer. Well, answer is often abbreviated to A, right? Q&A, question and answer. So if we take aced and we remove the A, aced without answer, we have CED. And the C goes here. It's securing ream, so the ED goes on the other end. We get the word creamed. And if you really beat someone, you cream them. Okay, 17 down. Splendid mother is above banter, mostly indifferent. Okay, well, mostly again, is an indicator that might be telling us to take most of a word, right? So mostly indifferent, most of indifferent is going to give us the kind of end of this clue, which points us towards splendid or splendid mother as our literal. And splendid mother, I mean, there's not really a direct word that means that. So my operating theory to start with would be that splendid is the definition here. So mother is above banter, mostly indifferent, getting us a word meaning splendid. Or your mother can be your mum or your ma, and we have M in first position, so that makes a lot of sense. And that goes above, and you can see it's a down clue, right? So ma is sitting above a word for banter, and a word for banter is jest. And then we have mostly indifferent, most of a word meaning indifferent. Well, if you're indifferent to something, you're cold to it, you're icy. And so if we take most of icy, we get the first two letters, I-C, giving us majestic. And majestic is another word for splendid. Let's look at 20 across then. Tall men's undergarments. Now, this is one of my favorite clues of the puzzle. It's a little bit ridiculous, but this is what's called a double definition, right? There's two sections of this clue, and they both are definitions of the same word. So we're looking for a word that means undergarments, and we're also looking for a word that means tall men. Well, tall men might be long johns, and long johns are a type of undergarment. It's a silly one, I apologize. Okay, 21 down. On reflection, want to keep provider of support on hand. Well, immediately, I can see the indicator on reflection. If you reflect on something, you kind of look back at it. So that's telling us to reverse some string of letters. And so our literal has to be at the end of the clue, either hand or on hand. So we're reflecting, we're reversing, want to keep provider of support. Well, if you want for something, quite obscurely, you might say you yen for it. And that's keeping, that's taking inside of it, a provider of support, a bra. Okay, so yen is going to keep bra. And all of that is reversed, right? So yen keeps bra, and we reverse it, we get the word nearby. And if something's nearby, it's on hand. All right, 23 across. Salary increase in public relations for yes man. Okay, well, for is what we call a link word, or it very often is. It's telling us that salary increase in public relations gives us, you need to solve that for a word for yes man. So a salary increase might be a raise. And if raise goes inside in public relations, PR, we get praiser. Raise inside PR. And someone who's a praiser is a yes man. Okay, stuffs cushions. This one is probably the clearest example you could ever get of a double definition, right? It's two words. There's no space for wordplay, so you know what's happening here is that these two words are going to have the same word as their definition, right? So we're looking for a word that is defined by stuffs and is also defined by cushions. Well, if you stuff something, you pad it out. So stuffs can be pads, and cushions which you sit on are pads. So both stuffs and cushions lead you to the word pads. And now we have a really easy time in solving 25 across. You could probably get it without even looking at the clue, but we can see there is a definition here, city. We're looking for a word that means city, an example of a city, and we're going to get there through style with a lot of character. Well, a city with D blank B blank I is the city Dubai. So let's pop that in and then figure out how it works. So if you style someone, and we're not talking about style as an aesthetic, we're talking about bestowing a title, you dub them, you dub someone a lord, right? And that's going with, so that gives us DUB, and that's going with a lot of character. Well, a lot works like mostly, right? It's telling you to take most of or a lot of a word for character. And your character is your air. So we're taking all but the last letter of air, giving us a I, Dubai. All right, 14 down then. Awakened one doctor, tad harsh to assume identity. Okay, now, this is a really tough clue, but I can see two kind of indicator words that gives us some clue as to what's going on. The first thing is doctor. Now, this is a really nice word for kind of tricking you in the surface of the clue. But if you doctor something, not a person, but an action, you change it, right? You edit a document, you doctor a document. So doctor is an anagram indicator telling us to anagram some chain either to the left or the right of it. Well, awakened one, as the thing that we're doctoring, would not give us enough letters, and neither would tad harsh. So let's just hold on that for a second and think about this last part. To assume identity. Well, if you assume something, you take it on, right? So something is going to assume identity. And ID is a common abbreviation for identity. So we're adding ID to tad harsh, which is being doctored. And tad harsh is 8 letters. We're adding 2 for ID, which gives us our 10 letters that we're looking for. So ID probably goes here, right? We can see a D there. And then we're jumbling up tad harsh to give us the rest of our letters. And that means that we're looking for a word that is defined by awakened one. Well, awakened one or enlightened one is a name for the Buddha, and the Buddha's first name was Siddhartha. Okay, so on to 26 then. German greeting with small number for holiday. Well, for, again, could be a link word, right? Telling us that we're doing German greeting with small number, and that's giving us, we solve that for a word meaning holiday. So let's operate on that assumption. German greeting could be a way to say hello in German, and the way to say hello in German is hallo. And then that's going with small number. Well, small in Scotland is wee, and number in maths is abbreviated to N, giving us Halloween. Okay, so 24 down then. Intimate mark on hand. Well, this doesn't have any indicator words at all, so it might kind of require a bit of playing around to figure out what is the literal and what is your cryptic section. But your cryptic section here is intimate mark. And your intimate is your friend, right? Your pal. So we have P-A-L, and then mark can be abbreviated to an M. And that's because in a lot of currencies, the Finnish mark, the Deutsch mark, the mark part is abbreviated to an M, right? So mark can become M, and then your palm is on your hand. 24 across, has a little cat and kips anyway. Well, here we have the word anyway, which could be an indicator for an anagram, right? If you treat letters anyway, you can jumble them up. So we're looking for 7 letters that we can jumble up. Well, we have kips and we have cat and kips. So we take cat and kips and we anagram them, and that's going to give us a word meaning has a little. Well, if you have a little, you pick at something, right? Have a little food, you pick at it. So has a little can be picks at, and picks at is an anagram of cat and kips. 22 down, starts off Chelsea's underwhelming championship, kept on 0-0 close to time. Okay, well, this is a question mark clue, which is telling you that something funny is going on, right? Something weird is happening with the clue. And in this case, it's that the literal definition is kind of unintuitive. It's a little bit abstract. So let's think kind of abstractly about our literal definition, close to time. How do I know that close to time is a literal definition? Well, that's because at the beginning of the clue, we have starts off. And this is telling you to take the starts of the following chain, right? It's a very common indicator. So we're taking the starts of Chelsea's, underwhelming, championship, kept, giving us cuck. And then that's going on 0-0. And 0-0 in a football game is 0-0. And a cuckoo bird on a cuckoo clock is close to time. You can see how that literal is fair, but it's a little bit weird, which is why the question mark is there. Okay, 22 across then. We have craft beer with a couple from work. Now, a couple from is an indicator telling you to take a couple of letters from. And so we're going to find a word for work and take the first couple of letters, which means that our literal must be craft. So we're looking for a word for craft, and we're going to get there through beer with a couple from a word for work. Well, a beer can be a can, and then your work of art can be an oeuvre. So we take the first two letters of oeuvre, O-E, and we get canoe. And a canoe is, of course, a watercraft, a type of craft. So 19 down, evil sibling bottling all the rage. Well, bottling is an indicator telling you to take something inside of it, right? If you bottle something, you kind of package it inside a bottle. So a word for a sibling is going to be bottling all the rage. Okay, well, if something's all the rage, it's really popular, right? It's in. And so we have in here, and a word for a sibling is going to bottle that, go around it, giving us a word for evil. See if you can figure it out from there. The answer is sinister. We're taking sister, and we're putting in inside of it, giving us sinister. Okay, 18 across, hesitate after lie accepted about biker, perhaps. Now, this perhaps word is one of a few words that can tell you that the literal you're looking for is not a direct synonym, but an example of something, right? What a biker might be rather than a synonym of a biker. So that's leaning me towards thinking that biker perhaps is our literal. We're looking for a word that is what a biker might be. And we're going to get there through hesitate after lie accepted about. Well, if you hesitate, you or you err, right? And those are two very useful kind of two-letter short synonyms that appear in cryptic crosswords. So hesitation or hesitate can often give you either ER or UM. And that's going after lie accepted about. Well, if it's going after it, we can put ER for hesitate at the end of the clue. And then we have a word for lie, which is accepting, it's taking in a word for about. Well, a word for about is very commonly RE. Again, it's used very often in cryptic crosswords, and it's because in an email, the subject line is RE, right? It's about, it's RE, this thing. So RE is going inside a word for lie. And if you lie about something, you gas about it. So we have GREAS, and that gives us greaser. And a greaser is a type of biker, right? It's what a biker might be. So 14 across then. Son opts to ring mobile for chit-chats. Well, we have, again, a link word here, for. So son opts to ring mobile can be solved for a word meaning chit-chats. And to ring is another common indicator telling you that son opts is going to go around, it's going to ring mobile. So son can be abbreviated to S, and we can see our S in first position. That's because in genealogy, if you're tracing a family tree, you write son as S. And so we have son, and then opts could be chooses, right? If you opt to do something, you choose to do it. And that's going to ring mobile, which can be abbreviated to M from kind of business cards or all over the place, really. You see M for mobile. So we get schmoozes, and if you chit chat with someone, you schmooze with them. 6 down, escape from bank, returning unharmed by the sound of it. So from can be a link word here. We get a word for escape from bank returning unharmed by the sound of it. And the other indicator I can see here is by the sound of it. This is an indicator for a homophone. That is, we're looking for a word that sounds like a word for unharmed, but is spelt differently. Okay, so we have bank returning, and then we have unharmed by the sound of it. Well, we've seen it before, right? If something returns, it goes back. It's like reflection. So we're looking for a word that means bank, and that's going to return. And if you bank your money, you pool it. So if we reverse the order of pool, we get loop. And then unharmed, well, if you're unharmed, you're whole, W-H-O-L-E. And that sounds exactly like, but is spelt differently to the word like a hole in the ground. And if we put hole in here, we get loophole. And an escape in a contract is a loophole. Okay, 10 across. Plays part in show nervously for shareholder. Okay, well by now hopefully you can spot a couple of things here. Firstly, we have for as the link word, telling us very likely we're looking for a word meaning shareholder. And we also have plays part in, which is telling us that the word we're looking for is just hidden in the remaining chain, show nervously. So we're looking for a word meaning shareholder, inside show nervously, and we can see here the word owner. And if you're a shareholder in something, you are an owner of it, or a part owner at least. All right, 8 down, assistant for crafts fairs a mile away. All right, well, we have a question mark here, so probably the definition is going to be a bit strange. It is. And then we are looking for some indicators. And a mile away could be telling us to take an M away from something. And that's because M is an abbreviation of mile in miles per hour, for example. So we're taking a mile away from the word fairs. Well, fairs can be marts, right? Fair is a mart where you sell lots of things. And so if we take the M away from marts, we get arts. And an assistant for crafts is art in the sense that you see arts and crafts together pretty often, right? As a duo, so they assist each other. Again, you can see why that question mark is necessary. All right, 12 across. Legendary musician changes topless, inspiring Europe. Okay, once again, we're looking for a strange definition here because we have the question mark. And I can see the indicator inspiring, and that means kind of to take in. So it's telling us one string is going to take in another string. And Europe is very often abbreviated to EU. So I think something is going to take in EU. Okay, which tells us that the literal is either legendary or legendary musician. Okay, so let's think about changes topless then. If something's topless, it loses its lid, right? It's not that it has its shirt off, it's that it doesn't have its top. Okay, so we're looking for a word for changes, and then we're going to take the first letter, the top, off of that word. And a word for changes is morphs. If you morph, you change. So we remove the first letter from morphs, and we get orphs. And that's going to take in inspire, EU. So we have Orpheus. And Orpheus is a legendary musician, not in the sense that he's really famous, in the sense that he was a musician in Greek mythology, a musician of legend. Okay, 7 down. Gathers wearing pelts taken from trap. Okay, well here I can see another homophone indicator. If you take something from your trap, meaning your mouth, you're looking for a word that sounds like a word for pelts or a word for wearing pelts, which tells us that our literal is the word gathers. So we're looking for a word for gathers that sounds like wearing pelts. Well, if you wear something, you're in it, and pelts could be furs. So in furs sounds like in furs. and if you infer something, you gather it, you come to understand it. Okay, so 2 clues left. First, we have route for food delivery goes without opening. Old woman involved in production. Okay, again, a question mark, so we're looking for a bit of a strange definition, and we can see a couple of perhaps kind of potential indicators here. So without opening could be telling us to remove the opening letter of something, and involved in could be telling us to absorb one string into another, right? If you're involved in something, you're a part of it. Okay, so that suggests that route for food delivery is probably going to be our literal. We're reading it as a word for goes or goes itself that doesn't open, and then a word for an old woman, which is involved in, it's inside, a word for a production. Okay, well, I can see the E here, so maybe goes just doesn't open. We don't even need a synonym. We just remove the G from goes and we get OES. Now, an old woman could be a hag, and a hag could go inside a word for a production, and we're thinking of a production in the same way that we were thinking about a work before, right? A production of art, a work of art could be your opus. So opus is taking in hag, and we get esophagus. And esophagus is a route for food delivery to your stomach. Okay, final clue of the crossword then. Rock is torturous. And this one is a double definition. You can see that there's not really any room for wordplay, so we're just looking for a word that means rock and also means torturous. And we have quite a lot of crossing letters to help us here. If something is torturous, it's long and winding, it's serpentine. And serpentine is also a type of rock. Okay, that's the crossword done. Thank you so much, and well done if you solved it. If you remember, at the beginning of this video, I told you I'd hidden a couple of trees in this crossword. So see if you can find them now. I'll give you a second. They are magnolia and sycamore. Thank you so much for watching. I hope I made cogs turn, and I'll see you tomorrow for a daily clue.